Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. As you can see, we have quite a star-studded show today. I'm here with my usual co-host, good old Josh.
Hello, everybody.
And two of the biggest, if not the biggest, legacy heads in the entire UK, Sahar and Luke. How are you guys doing?
We are good. Oh, I'm ready to talk about Legacy. I have opinions.
Yeah, really good. Thanks for inviting us, Luis. Really excited.
Glad to have you on. It's finally the showcase that everyone's been waiting for. The good old Legacy, as you guys are about to see as I pull it up. The metagame has been evolving a little bit ever since the Grief ban. There's one clear deck that stands above all right now in terms of meta share. But we really wanted to give you a nice deep down dive into what's going on in Legacy, what to be ready for, the difference between the online meta versus the paper meta, and what to expect in the upcoming big Legacy tournaments. And this is what these three experts are going to talk to you about. Two more than one of them. And we're all ready for it. So how about we begin with the elephant in the room? Blue-black reanimator.
Grief, bad, deck, still good. Who knew? Oh, this deck is the bane of my life. Oh, damn.
Yeah,
frog.
I think there's like two core facets of this deck, that one of which has been running through the format for a very long time, and that's Days, Wasteland, and then blue cantrips. And then the other one is something that's more recently printed, which of course is the big 2-drop Psychic Frog. And so while we're talking about Grixis Reanimator, it's important to also think of cards, shells with those cards in, right? Like Days, Wasteland, Force of Will, and Psychic Frog. So that includes, I guess, Grixis Tempo and Entombeless Frog.
See, I love Frog. When Frog got printed, that was everything I wanted to do in Magic. Like, that's the only card I've pretty much played in Modern and Legacy since that's been printed. And the fact that I think the problem with this deck is because it was already in strong colours anyway. So you got rid of the enabler in Grief, and it just got this Psychic Frog just took up the two slot spot where I guess Orcish Bowmasters once were, to give this broken sort of reanimate package a very, very strong mid-range game, which is very scary because this deck can now attack from multiple angles. It can't just attack from, you know, the sort of the old sort of fair blue-black sort of tempo strategy that it once was with Grief. That Grief was enabling, but this now has got a almost high power mid-range strategy as well as the combo element to it.
Yeah, exactly. I think Grief was good for the shell because it meant that one of Black's big strengths, this 4 Entomb, 3 Animate Dead, 4 Reanimate, fit neatly into the shell of blue-black tempo because it has this card that's always going to be in your graveyard, right? Especially in game 1 when you've got access to your graveyard. In Grief, we banned Grief, but that sort of 11 card package, 4 Reanimate, 4 Entomb, 3 Animate Dead, still really, really good when you can just easily discard your fatties to Frog. So you're absolutely right. The card advantage it generates is not to be sniffed at. That is a powerful card, and as Sahar will attest to, has sort of changed the landscape and has like dramatically had an impact on specific archetypes that can or can't deal with a 1-2 for 2.
Yeah. I think the main thing for me is that I'm glad a deck like this exists. What I am aggrieved by, and I think that's the way I'm going to phrase it, is that as playing against it, you don't know what you want to sideboard for. Do you want to sideboard to deal with Frog and like blue things, or do you want to sideboard in Graveyard Hate? So for me, the fact that it's so flexible is both its greatest strength and probably potentially makes it a tad too good. I think a bunch of people, when the ban, I was on Eternal Durdles a few weeks ago, talking about cards we wanted to get banned, and I think that it was right to ban Grief, but I think to keep an eye on the other cards in the format. I think the shell of the shell of Days, Wasteland, and Cantrips is just part of the format. That's why you come to play Legacy. I think that what surrounds it then becomes obviously very, very powerful. And the fact that this deck can just pivot to multiple different ways is both a greatest strength, but also there could be the issue that what kind of started happening before the Grief ban is that the deck kind of subsumes itself, and you kind of have anti-mirror tech, and its sideboards start to get really weird. So it's a deck that, folks, if you play a paper event, you play an online event, this is the big baddie of the format.
If you're here listening to this podcast, you already know this, right? Like, you've tuned in, you're like, oh, I've heard things about Legacy. I've heard there's this boogeyman. Is it too strong? Is it not? That's a whole conversation we could start and have. But one of the things I like about, like Josh talked about how much he loves Frog. I think if we can jump ahead a little bit to the Grixis tempo list, I think
just before we do that, I just want to say that Sahar highlighted the fact that this deck might be causing sort of sideboard and main deck sort of aberrations in how people build the decks, but this is not to the level, in my opinion, to where we saw in Hogak times in Modern, where people were main board and lane lines of the void.
Yeah.
People aren't main board and lane of the voids against this meta or this deck. What they're doing is they're now main boarding, which has been the first time in a while in Legacy, actual creature removal and interaction. So you see a lot of these decks playing main board Thought Seizers, main board Fatal Pushes, legitimate fair one answer spells, which when Grief was around, there was no reason to play removal because Grief stripped people's hands. So Legacy's getting more interactive, even though this is a strong Frog deck with that reanimator I win button. That it's way more interactive and way more fair, in my opinion, from my testing anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that completely, but you're definitely right in the sense that we've changed the removal spells we play. We can't feasibly play Lightning Bolt as we were about to look at, because Lightning Bolt isn't very good against Frog. Sahar, sad. He's died. He's fallen off the chair. Because Lightning Bolt isn't a very good answer to Psychic Frog, and so red mages everywhere are displeased. But yeah, I think you're right, and I think that isn't specific to Reanimator. I think that's a wider impact on the whole format. Important to say though, people are main decking Nile Spellbomb. That's way more common now, even in decks that aren't playing Urzasaga, which I think is, Nile Spellbomb cantripping in the matchups where it doesn't necessarily do anything else is necessary in a format like Legacy, where a Leyline in the Void and other matchups might do nothing and be.
So
be
that's
a dead weight.
interesting. It's a good way to segue into the Grixis tempo list that we are talking about. Also speaking about blue-black tempo, as they kind of fit the same shell. Obviously, I'm an outsider looking in. I don't play nearly as much Legacy as you guys do, and it raises some questions when I look at decks like this. Why is it so much stronger than everything else that's going on? Why is it that we can't just play a more almost like a Jund-esque style deck that can answer the graveyard and answer the small threats and play that game and keep you off your game plan? Why is that so difficult to do in Legacy compared to something like Modern, where when you want to fight Gorios or those style of here is my big reanimation plan with frogs, you just have efficient removal, some good graveyard hate, and you can fight it just fine. Why is it so much harder in Legacy to do so?
Force of Will and Days, baby.
Force some Will and Days. I
And
hate
it's
to
that
break it to you, Luis. Force some Will and Days breaks a person. I hate to break it to you. Force of Will Days Wasteland. There is, I will say, we've got the fairer decks coming shortly, and I think they have been trying to do the kind of Jund thing of remove your thing, deal with your problem. Here's my game plan. The thing is if you spend all the time doing the Jund thing, you end up losing quote unquote tempo. I mean, what is tempo? And you don't have as much time in Legacy that I think you do in something like Modern.
Especially with Psychic Frog in the format. It snowballs quite a lot quicker than in other formats here, because your permission is much more powerful. So it's rare the first removal spell kills Frog, right? Especially if I don't want you to kill my Frog. So you need a second one. And if you're using 2 removal spells on my first Frog, and using 2 removal spells on my second Frog,
or reanimating it.
Yeah, the Frog I've reanimated, or I do think it is tough to be a fair mage when there's cards like generating card advantage at that rate, and there's answers and interaction that cost very little resources outside of cards like Force of Will and Days. But I think this Grixis Tempo Shell is going to be well positioned because it is better against a wider range of things. And if you're going to Eternal Weekend, you have to remember there is a lot of nonsense. You've got to win rounds 1, 2, and 3 if you want to do well, really. And in rounds 1, 2, and 3, you might come against random things. We had a Pox deck at ELM that did surprisingly well. You might face that chap who just always plays Maverick, right? And might have the answer to the reanimate, but struggle against a wider volume of threats.
The one thing with this Grixis deck, though, and this is something for your viewers that I really want to drive home, folks. If you want to play this Grixis deck, you better have a very good understanding of the format and what you're trying to tackle, because this deck will hurt your brain. Because you have I cannot express, you have so many micro decisions that this deck asks of you. You fetch the wrong land, you brainstorm wrong, you ponder wrong, you remove the wrong thing, you worry about Tamio when you be worrying about DRC.
Wrong decision on a Surveil always gets me. The amount of times I've looked at my graveyard thinking, I surveilled that away so I could attack for 3 on turn 3, but now I really wish it was in my hand.
So this deck, so I had a little thought experiment. When post grief, I was like, you know what? I want to try and play a blue deck again just to feel something. And I picked this deck up, and I think I went like 0-25 in matches because no, like 3-25 in matches. When I was testing this before, I literally was like, I cannot do this to myself. This genuinely is going to hurt my brain because it's such a skill intensive deck, and it's not to like deter people, but if you like that kind of challenge, because you need the kind of Delver Grixis Tempo archetype is quintessentially the police of the format. It's there to be the police. It's there to be, you have cheap aggressive creatures and good efficient removal, and you're trying to close the game out. Or if you're, in this case, the list we have in front is playing Delver. Some people play Tamio for a bit more of a mid-range vibe. But this deck asks a lot of you, and it's an amazing deck to pick up to learn the format, but be prepared that if you're preparing for Eternal Weekend, you will spend the first few weeks losing because you're learning about how to play against the format. But it is the greatest gift. If you pick this deck up,
about what does a winning board state look like for blue-black reanimator, 50% of the time I've reanimated an Atraxa on turn 2, drawn enough cards where it doesn't matter what my opponent's doing, I'm going to outvalue them, and I'll just beat them down with a 7/7 lifelink. And then 50% of the time, it's like a grindy frog, troll, difficult attacking, blocking, casting removal spells. In Delver, that's 100% of the time, right? Like, you haven't got any of those, like, quick, oops, I've just flipped the Atraxa into play. You have 100% of your wins are going to be ground out with, like, very few permanents on the battlefield. Like, hopefully very few cards in hand by the end of the game. It's, yeah.
So what you're alluding to there is the I win button. This deck does not have an I win button. This deck you have to earn your wins. And the things what's attractive about decks like Reanimator, what's attractive decks like Cephalid Breakfast, etc., is that you can have a nut draw that's so outrageous that you just win the game. And
speaking of outrageous nut draws,
sorry, just 1 second. In a long tournament where you're looking at like Eternal Weekends where you have to win 15 games of Magic to win the whole thing, those nut draws and having access to those nut draws are very important. So Sahar's completely right. If you pick up this deck, you need to know exactly the angle you're fighting for. You need to know exactly what you're pondering for. You need to know exactly where you're brainstorming, and every decision you make has to have a reason behind it.
Yeah. This does not have an I win button. No. But my God, is it fun to play when you're not worried about the baddie.
Or a particularly unstoppable series of first couple of turns, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to have quite such an abrupt I win button as Reanimator, but decks like Eldrazi will just play a series of threats and lock pieces, which we can look at now over turns sort of like 1, 2, 3, that feel overwhelming, despite not being necessarily quite as flexible or fluid. I think Luis, you talked about how, why can't you just jund them out? I think Forcible is necessary against decks that are trying to play out cards like, well, Chalice of the Void doesn't see as much play. Maybe Trinosphere, and other lock pieces like Blood Moon or Snaring Bridge that we see from decks like Eldrazi and Painter, which I think we're going to talk about next, as well as Mono Red Stompy.
Very interesting. So it's very similar then to like the modern players that might be listening in. It's something like blue-black / wizards that exists in modern. This is that style of deck. You don't have the I win button. Your battles and your games are very hard fought. You have to think about every little thing. Maybe you have a decent removal package and some decent threats, but you can't just, win for free essentially like you can in other moments. Whereas Reanimator, again, it similar to Goryo's in a way, but it has a lot more engine to it than Goryo's, because Goryo's tends to fall a little flat sometimes.
The Reanimator deck is not just a big pile of I win button or I lose. It is if I'm going to press my I win button, and if you stop me from pressing my I win button, You know what? I've got a game. I've got a really strong plan B.
Makes
where
sense.
these Grixis, I'm going to categorize these as frog decks. I've been sweating blue black frog, and it's fairly similar. I'm just not playing the red. I would recommend consider the red though, because DRC into Bauble is a hell of a drug, and it fuels your Murktide. And I would say that you're all in on that mid range, on that sort of fair package and that grindy package. So having a deck that does both is pretty good.
Also, Luis, nothing brings me more joy than Price of Progressing a lands or Eldrazi opponent.
I was looking at that.
If it got printed into Modern, I play Modern tomorrow.
And that's exactly what, normally when you think of these style of decks for you're not a Legacy player, you think, okay, these decks are good, but they have a little bit of problem versus big mana and all these things. Wasteland shores up a lot of that. But why is it then that Eldrazi can do quite well into this kind of metagame, even though with something like Wasteland being around, which is the next deck we're talking about?
The cheeky thing with the Eldrazi decks that were available right now is they're not actually a big mana deck. They're just playing lands that tap for 2. So, like,
we love it. I love this deck. As an Ancient Tomb fangirl, all are welcome in the Ancient Tomb fan club. I love this deck. Luis, do you know what's good about this deck that's not a big mana deck? We'll get to Cloudpost shortly, but this deck is actually a glaring Fleshbreaker deck. That is what holds this and Sowing Microspawn hold this deck together like glue.
Yes.
Yeah. So we talked about how the Delvalists can play Wastelands and Daisies, and that's because it can play on 2 lands throughout the game. Most of its spells it can cast off 2 lands. Eldrazi isn't a big mana deck. Most of its spells it can cast off 2 lands. It's just that these are 4-drops, not 2-drops or 1-drops. I'm not sure I love exactly the list we're looking at. I think Vexing Bauble's been particularly important in the current metagame over a card like Chalice of the Void. But, like Sahar said, Glaring Fleshraker and Sowing Microspawn, alongside this suite of 2-mana producing lands, Ancient Tomb, Eldrazi Temple, City of Traitors, really pushes your engine out of reach of a lot of the kind of fair decks in the format. And yeah, it's a powerful strategy.
It is a very powerful strategy. And I think the thing with the Eldrazi deck also is, Vexing Bauble, Chalice of the Void, I think it's probably a medical. The addition of Ring and Once Upon a Time also is very akin to Tron. If you think about like the ancient people have tried ancient stirrings and this as well, but I think you need what used to happen with Eldrazi of old. I think Luke and Josh might remember of those days when we played it and felt something for like 2 weeks, is that it just kind of ran out of gas. Things like Kozilek's Command, Glaring Fresh Air give you that sort of like plan B, which is why you have Lotus Petal in the deck as like another piece of acceleration, but also it triggers Fleshraker, and before you know it, 2 Fleshrakers, you're basically dead.
So here's a look at this deck. A good example, because I'm looking at a deck with Roning in it. A good example is what Luke said about this is not a big mana deck. This is just casting its 4 mana spells for 2 lands or whatever. Like if you were to cast 1 ring in this deck, unless you're using Ancient Tomb, 2 Ancient Tombs, you are casting 1 ring on curve. You know what I mean? For 4 mana.
Someone hold me. And that's all I want to do. That's all, honestly, outside of casting Fort Not Seer and Glaring Freshraker, 1 ring is a really nice, again, I think Luke said it, reach. Giving decks like this another avenue to find their cards. 1 ring does that. Kozilek's Command does that. Like, I love this deck. I think it's not, there is definitely iterations of it, and I think the Eldrazi community aren't fully digging from the same hymn sheet. I think there are still people figuring stuff out. But if you are an Ancient Tomb gamer and you still have Eye of Ugin from when you had it from back in the day, Eldrazi is a very good choice. I think the one thing I will say for if you're a Tron fan or if you're a fan of these kind of strategies, is that be prepared for people to be ready for you. This deck has weak points. Wasteland is a weak point. Blood Moon is a weak point, but
you attack the mana against it. If you're fighting this deck, you attack the mana. Like every time I've won against this deck, it's been because I attacked the mana. I've wastelanded out and then Harbinger sees them. Like that's how you beat this deck.
But if you're not, otherwise, prepare for them to kill you. Also, Soul Micro Spawn double wastelands you. Like, that's insane. Take your basic land and then waste your other land. You've got no lands. They've got like an extra land. You know, they've wasted you out the game, and they've got a 3/3 to stand for.
I think this deck is surprisingly resilient to wasteland, especially on the play where you can land some of these 3/3s and 4/4s, then get wastelanded. Like, look your opponent dead in the eye, put your Ancient Tomb in the graveyard, shrug, and attack him for 7. Right? Like, it's done its thing. Like, it was a. But I agree, Josh. You're right. The mana base is vulnerable to attack, and I think another avenue is Painter's Servant, which I think we'll talk about pretty soon.
Yeah, we'll get
turning off your Eye of Ugin and your Eldrazi Temple from tapping for 2 mana because your Eldrazi spells are no longer colorless, which is fascinating.
That is a fast. Let's get to Painter.
I actually didn't think about that because
that's the tech. That's the tech. You put Painter's Servant, name a color. These lands don't tap anymore. Also, really fast combo is a pain for this deck, which is why 3 Rainbow Traps are on the side.
You can't consign to memory the spells anymore, which is always fun to do.
It is crazy to me looking at this, because you could literally go Eye of Ugin, put the It that heralds the end, and then a glaring Fleshbreaker because everything costs 1 less, and then you make a Scion or something. This seems insane to me when I look at it. As someone who's not used to these style of decks. It's quite an interesting time.
Yeah, it's like Tron, except you need any 2 lands rather than 3 specific lands. Think of it that way.
Very, very cool.
Right, let's get to Painter. Now, again, we welcome everyone into the Ancient Tomb fan club. Even the cousin that combos off whenever it wants. This deck is sweet. It is very hard to play, and it's only because
it's hard to play against as well.
Yes.
And look, guys, there's a place to play your Furies once again. Oh my god!
So a couple of important things to look at when we look at these deck lists is it's the card Red Elemental Blast or Pyroblast. These lists can play 7, even 8 copies of that card, which is really good because it's a removal spell that answers Psychic Frog, which Josh was talking about at the beginning, as well as countering a lot of blue spells in the format. We've just looked at 2 really important sort of blue shells that spans across 3 real archetypes, and we'll definitely be looking more as this episode continues. And then even when your red spells might be dead, your Red Elemental Blast might be dead, you can play your powerful Painter Servant, name blue, make all spells blue, and start blowing up people's permanents or lands that way.
Yeah.
And then the other card I wanted to talk about is Vexing Bauble, which we would have talked about in more detail in the Eldrazi list if it was in there. This card's really shaken up the format, and arguably more so than Psychic Frog in some ways, in the sense that it's had a wider impact on different, right? Like, the decks that could play Psychic Frog were just playing Psychic Frog, whereas lots of different decks have arisen and started playing Vexing Bauble that wouldn't have necessarily played a similar lock piece in the past. And I actually think this has had a much more widespread impact on the format as a whole when it comes to different archetypes than Psychic Frog has.
So Vexing Bauble is much better placed in this deck than is Eldrazi. I actually am not a fan of Vexing Bauble in the Eldrazi deck because you play Cavern of Souls. Like, what you need, a nice Force of Will, bro. Here's my Cavern of Souls. However, in this, it makes tons of sense because you are a lot of your interaction that you bring in, a lot of your combo piece can just be Force of Willed out in the days of old. Now you're playing Vexing Bauble, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, against Painter now, my sideboard plan is to remove all Force of Wills and all dazes. Like, I don't play Force of Wills and Days against Painter anymore. I just take them out because it's pointless. I just play hard removal because they're playing the Vexing Bauble and I don't want any text on that Vexing Bauble because there's so many ways to get it and then they can cycle it around, bounce it in and out the graveyard. So I decided I'm not bringing Force of Wills in. I'm not bringing Dazes in. I'm just going to bring in hard removal and graveyard hate.
Also,
there you go. Like, the Vexing Bauble having a real impact on the format outside of Psychic Frog, which is really, really cool. So for anyone not au fait, this combo works with the card Grindstone, which you can see in the weird prosperity frame in the top right corner, which says, you tap it, pay mana and tap it, and then you mill 2 cards. If those cards share a color, you repeat this process. So for 4 mana, you can, with a Painter 7 in play, you can play and tap your Grindstone to mill your opponent's deck, which is pretty powerful. Believe it or not. You can fetch off Urza Saga, which is why we only really see 2 copies, and you can use your sort of 8 Goblin Welder effects, that's 4 Goblin Engineer, 4 Goblin Welder, to move it in and out of the graveyard as and when.
I will also say here that one thing about this deck, it's a very good Urza Saga deck, but it's also a deck that can be adapted. I've seen lists with Karn, I've seen lists more lean, I've seen more mountains. This is the more mountain version.
You can play Plateau and Swords to Plowshares, Josh, if you want to get more removal for those Psychic Frogs.
You can play You can play Chaos Defiler. If you
Yeah,
want to
Badlands
splash
and
black.
Chaos Defiler.
Oh,
Mhm.
I've even seen fourth Irelingus in Painter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
Good example.
that was a way of going wide against the control decks. This deck is very versatile, and it's a deck that if you want to pick up and learn and be a painter nerd, the painter community are very, very welcome. Fortunately, the mods of the painter community is British, and it's
Yeah.
very nice. And Callum Smith, also known painter nerd. So if you guys want to get into painter, it's an amazing deck to play. It's a lot to kind of get into because you have got so many toolbox ways of doing things, and you have like multiple.
It's so big brain. Like it's so big brain.
Yeah.
Would this
And just because
be?
it's not Brainstorm and Dragon's Rage Challenger doesn't mean there aren't micro decisions. What you're discarding to your Fable, which Welder you're playing, how long you hold on to your Pyroblast. There's a lot of complicated decisions in this. What you fetch with your Urza Saga. I think it's it's fun as well. Is the other thing.
Yeah. From what
having
I've
fun
seen,
with ancient tombs and mountains. It sounds like Sahar, you're very familiar with that, but not necessarily with these 60 cards. Are there any other 60 cards you want to be more familiar with? Should we talk about mono red?
We'll talk about it in just a second because just from everything going on with this deck, I saw it a handful of times. I know Josh has played against it a fair few times in a few leagues. We got crushed with the most crazy Fable, copy my Goblin Welder, loop my Vexing Bobble, draw one or two cards every turn kind of loop. Because there's a lot going on. When I think of this deck, what it reminds me the most of, modern-wise, is something like Yawgmoth. That kind of fetches its pieces and then uses its graveyard in some functionality to win the game.
You do win it by attacking and blocking sometimes.
And that's what it makes me think of. So, if you're a Yawgmoth gamer and you like these things and you want to get into Legacy, it's relatively a cheap deck compared to a lot of the other Legacy decks.
Don't look too hard on those City of Traitors, but
don't worry about those. Don't worry about those. But compared to a lot of the other stuff going on, this is maybe one of the starting points that you could go for. Because if you look at it, there's a lot of cards here that you probably just own. Furies you might own from the ban. Vexing Baubles are relatively easy to get. Fable you probably owned for a long, long time. One Rings, most people that are really competitive will own them. Phyrexian Dragon Engine is going to cost you 2 pence. Urza Sagas you're going to have. A bunch of these little pieces you'll own. So it's not a bad place to get started, and it is a very interesting deck.
And I will say, you actually probably don't need City of Trade. It's good, but you don't need it.
Well, also, one of the things that Sahar and I would champion always is accessibility, and if you're looking to play Legacy in especially the UK, we got you covered, right? Like, there's a whole network of people that can lend you these cards for that event, so don't worry too much. If you're excited to play this and you've been testing out Magic Online, absolutely reach out to Sahar and I, and we'll put you in touch with someone that can help you out.
A little story I've got about this deck, because I played an ELM qualifier and someone brought Painter and he didn't own this. I think he was 2 City Traitors down, so he just put Wasteland in that spot. And I whole games, like games up until I lost against him, like I think it was in the semi-finals, like I did not play around Wasteland because I was like, Painter doesn't play Wasteland. But he just had them in his deck because Paper Legacy is Paper Legacy. So he had Wasteland, and I got Wastelanded out on turn 1. I was like, what is that? What is happening?
I love it.
Like I was going to ponder with that.
I love Legacy.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Louis,
speaking about loving Legacy, something that Sahar is known to love, we have good old Dork Stompy.
Oh my god. Okay,
Mono red Stompy.
Firstly, the mono red community have gone slightly insane because we're playing 12-4 drops in a deck that has 19, 20, like 18, 19 lands. I can explain everything. So mono red, so Moon Stompy mono red. So this was the quintessential red prison deck of old, where you'd play Chalice of the Void, Trinispheres, Blood Moons, and basically just get them. And now,
or not.
It's sometimes you just
kind of get forced.
Yeah, sometimes you just they forced everything, wasteland, you never did anything. It just happens. But I think that mono red right now is in this very interesting position where it's kind of good against a lot of the format, but it does struggle against the big baddie. And it's not to say you can't win games with it. We've got our Pyroblast. The reason why we moved to Vexing Bauble, so we didn't have the tension of Chalice of the Void and Pyroblast and what you draw. One of the big complaints I had when I picked up mono red again is that none of our efficient threats could deal with Frog. You can't Fury it. Dead Gone is basically like what you bounce it, and it's like it, it sort of it just so it's a deck that it's in this weird spot where it's good against everything else, but it's not. It's weak point. I say weak point, but it's unfavored against the big baddie. And I'm basically spending most of my testing time trying to work with other blue-black mages to be like, okay, what are you worried about? Is it your mana? Because a good blue-black pilot, if they know they're playing against mono-red, will play their basic island, gets troll, get their basic swamp, and can play the game. So your plan A's don't necessarily work anymore. This list that we see, this has kind of been piloted by Modo Grinder Silent Goat, who has basically sort of taken it's a White Principe listed Silent Goat list, basically, who's basically taken the approach of like, well, let's just go bigger. Let's not worry about Wasteland. Let's just go bigger. And Pyrogoyf is a hell of a drug.
Yeah.
Copy it Reflections. You have a great time. Strong Ladies are back. My main concern with a deck like this is this many 4-drops with a mana base is interesting. It is wild. I personally have for my own personal deck list, I've brought the curve way down. One card I'm excited for Dustmourn to test out is Ghost Vacuum as a main deck graveyard hate answer. Unlicensed Hearse has been in there in times of old. I want to try Ghost Vacuum because 6 mana, get your Atraxa, get your Archon, get your Troll as 1/1s, get the ETB trigger, fill your hand, or deal with a bunch of stuff and then win the 6 mana win the game. Hopefully, it's still untested. But yeah, I think people kind of come to me and go, "Oh, so why would you ever play a deck like this?" Decks like this, I reward good mulligan decisions, good sequencing decisions. Your first 3 turns, if you don't know what your first 3 turns look like, you are losing the game. One ring gives you extra reach. One ring is absolutely busted in this deck. Don't look at Ancient Tomb. Don't look at the 8 MDFCs. I will take 8 to happily play a one ring. Will I lose to my own one ring? Probably, but that's the price I pay to join the Ancient Tomb fan club. But I love this deck. But this deck is like, if you're a blue mage or you're kind of playing like mid-range decks and you pick this up and like, oh, this deck's really easy, and then you lose because you haven't mulliganed properly to a good turn 1 play or you haven't sequenced correctly, I'm sorry to break it to you, but...
You started with City of Traders and forgot it had a trigger to kill your own land?
Yes, Habibi. Well, I've done that more than once.
I think part of the problem with this deck is the winning board state and the sequence that leads you to the winning board state look very similar, but ultimately you could lose. You can be, unlike Psychic Frog decks, unlike Painter, where you're sort of grinding towards one specific outcome. You're just clinging on with these decks, right? You're just hoping that you get there, and you spend so much time like.
I'm not gonna lie. If I was playing this deck, or I decided to this deck, I think I would have an aneurysm at every possible moment because I'd be like, okay, so
I have an aneurysm watching you play Blue Black Frog, let alone something like this.
Okay, boys, hear me out. The winning board state for this deck is 1 ring and a bomber.
Yeah.
You just need to get 1 ring and a bomber, and then Pyrogoyf for lost. Or Fable, and you're basically setting up for a double spell, Goblin Rabble Master Bomber, like you're setting up for that kind of board state. You basically want decks like this are haymakers. They demand answers all the time. I'm gonna play this. Do you have an answer for it? Yes. Okay, cool. I've got this. Against blue decks, you're basically trying to like drain their resources.
Yeah.
And so against control, I have a lovely time. Like the Beans deck. You're just like, oh, Habibi, you're just gonna sit there pondering, brainstorming. Here's a Pyrogoyf, attack. Here's a Strong Lady, attack. Here's the initiative, by the way. Here's Bomber, throw a Chrome Mox that I no longer need. Here's 2 to your face. Oh, by the way, let me throw my 1 ring. Here's 6 to the face because my life total is too low. Like
it's very much the classic. Red, you want to answer. You want to ask the questions, not answer them. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's basically this deck.
This build especially is Luis, I've noticed that you're like comparing these to modern decks. I think this is nearly burn, right? Because you're just doing all your cards win the game about as much as each other. You just have to have some resolve, and if they do, you probably win. Right?
Yeah.
This is burn if burn was good.
Exactly. Right here, Habibi, I'm right here. But yeah, I think decks like this, it's similar with Burn. I think decks like this ask questions. And I think against things like Eldrazi,
they don't just ask questions, Sahar. They demand answers.
They demand, demand. But the reason why I love playing decks like this, especially at tournaments, is it has an I win button. It has an I win button in Blood Moon. It has an I win button in Vexing Bauble. It has an I win button in Bombardiers. Like it has I win buttons. And sideboard, you just try to navigate around to kind of deal with your problematic matchups. But Blood Moon against a lot of the format, you go turn 1 Blood Moon and your opponent stares at 3 fetch lands and they're like,
yeah, sometimes the frog deck doesn't have force and you're on the play and they're decked to Blood Moon, right? Like it happens, right? So
so it does have an I win button, but yes, it's not as much as it again, more answers, Happy. I'm just gonna keep throwing haymakers until they say no.
Yeah, right, I want to talk about Cephalid Breakfast next because we just were about to talk about win the game buttons and
exactly I win buttons.
Yeah, this deck got a lot better with Modern Horizons, but not really for not a popular way, right? Like Frog's unpopular, powerful, and fun. Vexing Bauble is kind of just been subsumed politely into Legacy and is powerful and engaging and changing the format.
You're telling me this is not popular,
hated, right?
This is not popular right here. Is this card?
I'll leave Luis and Josh to tell us why, right? You've had a good time playing Modern at the beginning of the RCQ season, right?
So the thing. Okay, so let me talk about Nadu in Legacy, specifically the Legacy.
I think it's fine.
Okay. Yes. So that Legacy, there's lots of 2-card combos that just win you the game. That's completely fine. Like that exists. The problem with the Nadu is that in order to interact with that 2-card combo, will help them with that combo. But also when they're comboing off, people aren't good enough and don't really know what they're doing with that combo. So then you're watching this potentially non-deterministic combo going off. And they sat there for 15 minutes. And if it's online, I will make people lose the clock. I will sit there. I'll go for a vape. I will go watch something else while you combo off. You can use your time. However, when I'm sat there on paper and I'm watching you do the thing, and then you ask them, you say they demonstrate the loop, and you go on then, and then they don't know how to win. That is awful. This card.
KCI, is that you?
It is a lot easier. In this particular Legacy Nadu list, it's a lot easier. I loved watching the Pro Tour when Cedric Phillips was thinking about making a people, right? In that deck, you used Springheart Nantuko to make 1/1 insects. They're your people. In this deck, your people are Cephalid Illusionist and Nomads and Core. They're gonna win the game on their own. Right? The 1/1s here aren't just green insect tokens. No. They're
winning the game.
Cards from the 90s that win the game.
I like that 2-card. I like that 2-card combo. I like Cephalid Breakfast combo because you can be like, I present them. Can you interact with them? No. All right, fine. You just win then. Happy. Game 2. Let's go.
You'll be familiar with cards like Shuko and Ceph if you're a Modern player. Cards like Shuko for the Nadu deck, right? And even it was playing the green Nomad. Yeah. No, I think you're Elvish Herder in Legacy, but yeah. These cards are familiar in Modern. The Cephalid Breakfast deck was already playing them, right? To trigger a Cephalid Illusionist and win the game with Dread Return on Thassa's Oracle.
That just fits in the deck. It just fits in the deck. It's just another avenue to win, and it's just so annoying.
Now the mana base has gotten worse because you've got a splash green. But
it's a good. Cephalid Breakfast is a deck that if you're a combo nerd and you like blue decks, may I present you Cephalid Breakfast? Go watch our video on it on the Legacy Gambit. I'm going to plug myself off a second, where we had an amazing time pre-Nadu winning with the deck. Because the deck also, this is one thing I like about the blue combo decks is that they have a board state they're trying to get to. Sometimes they could just 1-2 punch you and you turn 1 Nomads, turn 2 Cephalid, you would lose the game. But it can have game. It's got this Urza Saga plan. It's got the Shuko 2-1 plan. I've definitely lost to 2-1s.
Oh yeah, equip an Archetype with a Shuko and attack for 2 in the air.
Yeah, I've lost to that game plan more times than I care to admit. So yeah, I think Cephalid Breakfast is a really good deck, very well positioned, and can kind of just deal with a lot of the format because again, it has Force of Will, Ponder's Brainstorm, things like that. Right. Luis, let's move on to the control deck because control weirdly is good right now.
I'd say before we do that though, Luis, you were about to say something? I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry, Luis. Apologies.
I was just gonna make a joke. Where else can you go and die to a bunch of tentacly boys? It's great. A flying jellyfish and an octopus. That's all it was.
Cephalids don't exist anymore, right?
Yeah, they're octopuses now. I think, right?
They exist in our hearts. They exist in names. He's still a Cephalid by name, just not a Cephalid by kindred.
Nature.
But yeah, everything's been said. I think this deck's sweet. I think you should give it a go. It's got unstoppable draws with turn 1 Nomads, turn 2 Cephalid Illusionist, and you win. All right.
And your Nadu got banned in Modern, and you have a few £1,000 laying around. Come and join us, buy a few dual lands, and come and play.
Buy some Tundras, live a little. Right, let's go to what I think is actually, and I'm gonna go on a limb here.
Oh no.
So look, one thing about Jeskai Control is that it's always there. Whether you like it or not, you will play against it at Eternal Weekend, you will play against it because the control players want to feel something.
Especially in a British meta. British metas love a Jeskai Control deck.
British, Italian, German, they all love it. However, outside of Tundra, you don't actually need Tundra. Tundra helps, but this is probably actually one of the, outside of Force of Wills and Force Negations, is one of the cheaper decks of the format. You don't actually need the dual lands. This deck can actually play, if you're playing back to basis, which I know this, which is they're playing 2 of, you can play this with a fairly budget mana base.
Yeah, you can borrow a Null Rod. That's the only expensive card here other than the dual lands, right?
Yeah. Like, and even Null Rod, you can play Wrath of the Skies and other things. But this is very, if you're a control nerd and you play Jeskai Control in Modern, or you've played like big, kind of Jeskai Control in Modern is probably a good analog to this. This is basically has a bunch of answers. It demands, it basically asks the question, like, they do something, you have a response to it. The thing with Control in Legacy is that when there is a known metagame, and you know that you have to deal with 10 decks. Control's very good because it knows what it has to answer. It knows it needs, Wrath of the Skies, it needs Source of Plowshares, it needs Dress. It has the things it needs to. When it's a very diverse metagame, Control struggles because it's like it can't answer everything. So sometimes it will just lose to it will just lose to Doomsday when actually it's trying to beat up Reanimator, for example. And I am glad Tameo is in the deck. Thank God, it has another win condition.
I think Tameo's in the deck because it's a control card, in my opinion. I don't think it's a win condition. But yeah,
it definitely is a win condition. Trust me on that one.
I think it's in the same way that Days Undoing is a win condition, where it doesn't actually win the game, but it puts you so far ahead on card advantage that you can't lose.
Yeah,
I think it's really interesting that we've looked at 2 blue-white decks back to back. The first one plays Nomads in Core and then plays Cephalid Illusionist and then wins. Right? Some percentage of your games, Nomads in Core, Cephalid Illusionist win. This deck, some percentage of the games, you're gonna play Island, you're gonna play Plains. Then 10 turns later, you're still going to be playing the game.
10. So Luis, you've played against Control in your life, I imagine. This is what I call the 10,000 years deck, because Control mages around the land are sitting there going, land, go, and sitting, like, thank God Four Ferrolingus got printed. It's the best Entreat the Angels has ever been printed. Because finally they have a win condition. It only took them 10,000 years. But yeah, I've definitely played against this on our channel, when I've been testing Modo, and just my guy, I'm dead. Just kill me. It's turn 15. How am I not dead?
Well, to make another comparison to Sahar's favourite deck, we were talking about how important mulligan decisions are in Moon Stompy. It's because the cards you start in your opening hand with are the cards you're going to play the game with.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, the cards in your opening hand when you're playing blue-white control like this, maybe splashing red in this case, maybe the cards you start in your opening hand are almost certainly not the cards you're going to win the game with. They're like, if they are, you need a mulligan.
Exactly. This deck is very, very good, but it rewards a understanding, again, similar to what I was talking about with
Grixis.
Blue Control also hasn't got an I win button. I mean, Narset Days Undoing is basically the closest to an I win button.
You've also got Forfeilingus and then Mystic Sanctuary back Forfeilingus. But I think that's not even present in this list.
But essentially, it's a grind you down, slow and go kind of game.
The winning board state for this deck, you've got 8 lands in play. Your opponent's maybe got 4. They've got no other permanents. You've got a Tameo Planeswalker. You've got 7 cards in hand. They've got 2. Right, like
I'm right here. Here.
You're on 7 life. They're on 16, and they're scooping. That's the winning board state.
It's a very interesting deck. Looking at this as well, because a lot of players as well that were used to playing blue-white control or Jeskai in standard Pioneer Modern, A lot of these players have lost their feeling of that deck, especially in Modern. It's not really what it used to be. It's not this traditional control anymore.
Yeah.
We have now the Jeskai Scam, or we have the Jeskai Energy style deck, but it doesn't feel the same. So if you really want to get that feeling again, come and try Jeskai Control in Legacy. It's it's relatively cheap. And we were saying, you don't need the dual lands to actually play this deck. You might even be able to get away with a shock land
deck as well, because you cast your brainstorms the latest in the game than you do in any other deck, and so the cards you're drawing and the cards you're putting back have a bigger difference in how good and bad they are at that moment in the game. So like you're brainstorming into Plows and putting away fetch lands when you've got too many lands, or you're brainstorming into Narsets and putting away Force of Wills when your opponent's got no cards in hand. It's a really fun deck that really showcases Brainstorm as a card.
It's definitely something to try.
Of your hand in a really big way.
Yeah.
But this is an important part of the metagame. You'll see different control shells, some with back to basics, some without, some with Beanstalk, which I think we'll talk about today, some without. But they're an important pillar of Legacy format, and I think there's all kinds of control decks for all kinds of modern players that want to, as I would say, that want to feel something. Speaking of people that want to feel something, I do quickly want to talk about Boros Stoneblade, or Death and Taxes, if you will.
That was up next.
Oh my god. So, Al Jardy.
There's been versions of this strategy, this archetype, that span the length of basically Legacy's history, right? Even type 1.5. We're playing Yorion, a card banned in Modern. If you want to feel something, want to play some Yorion, this is your deck. And we're also playing a bunch of sort of powerful new creatures, and we're attacking and blocking to win the game. If we were to look back at the other times we've discussed the winning board state, when you're playing Death and Taxes, your winning board state is the most permanence out of any other deck's winning board state, right? Like you are playing things. You're wizard squares flying everywhere.
You have game objects on board.
You're on your opponent's playmat, right? You've got 80 cards and they're all in play. Like, and it is phenomenal, and it's changed a lot. The kind of strategy that the way it plays out is different. It's a bit less taxing. We don't see any Thalias in this list at all, I don't believe. We're doing more of a Moon Stompy, playing out threats that slow your opponent down, but are mainly just there to test their answers. And I think, it's powerful strategy. Sahar, not a fan? You keep shaking your head.
No. So D&T has gone through many iterations. Shout out to the Death and Taxes community for maintaining like the little creatures of Legacy. Death and Taxes basically says, I am trying to disrupt your game plan. That is the whole emphasis of Death and Taxes. The reason I think now with the splash for red, to call it tomato and taxes, marinara and taxes, there's been a black white, which was with Emperor Bones as a way to counter reanimator. They have all the most efficient things. They have the best removal. They have the best, they can just go turn 2 Stoneforge into Cauldron. That's basically how you win. They have Source of Plowshares. They have Skyclave to deal with, frogs and things like that. The addition of
utility lands, right? Like Raysan, Rashad, and Port.
Yeah.
Caracas.
Exactly. So that's what this.
Is there no Rashad and Port in this list?
No, because they're playing Plateau for red.
Yeah, wow.
But yes, mono white versions will play Rashad and Ports and like utility lands like Ghost Quarters and things like that. This archetype is very revered in both the British community and across the world. And is an archetype that I think is in the right hands. And I say this with love. Death and Taxes is a lifestyle. If you're a D&T player, you're a D&T player. Like, I don't know.
I think this is one of those decks that attracts us culture to it, and it is.
Yeah.
If you are a D&T player, you're quite right. You are defined as a D&T player. Like you don't. They're almost as hardcore as these infect players. Well, at least infective like admitted defeat now. But Death and Taxes, you are 100% correct.
If you ever wanted to join a cult, right?
Yes. Yeah. Death and Taxes is your cult.
And the thing with this deck is it crosses the line, or it blurs the line between control and aggro, because it doesn't necessarily have an I win button. Like the I win button in this deck is turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic into a turn 3 Cauldron complete. That's it. And even then it takes 4 turns to kill you. So that's like the highest I win button. But this deck really does grind you out, slow you down, to then, as Luke rightly said, present all their squares and win the game. And if you can keep them away from that, like you can match them with removal, or you keep them from doing their thing, then Death and Taxes can either be one of the hardest matchups you can play, or one of the easiest, depending on what you're playing. If you're playing Reanimator, you just do your plan as fast as possible.
Exactly. You don't beat Death and Taxes by playing them at their own game. You beat Death and Taxes by doing something ridiculously wild and unfair.
So there's a story of two locals that we had. There's a story I got remember telling. It was a game. It was two lads, and one was trying. They were trying to basically. It was D&T versus not Through the Breach, Show and Tell.
Yeah.
And the Show and Tell player was like, he was playing like, trying to play around this, trying to play around that. And the D&T player went, no, just do your thing as early as possible. And then he just beat him every time. And that's how you beat Death and Taxes, is you be overwhelmingly unfair. Because the moment you're trying to play a fair game, like against like a Delver strategy or a blue black tempo strategy, D&T is favored there, because that's what it's designed for. It was designed for when Delver was the best deck. Like Delver was the best deck. You bring D&T, slows them down, Thalia, and all that good stuff. But yeah, it's the die-hard deck.
It is a die-hard deck. Also, Luis, I want to say, Recruiter of the Guard and Flicker Wisp is a hell of a drug. Because you just do the thing and then you get the thing, and then once that part of the board state happens, you basically they just need to kill you.
Well, Yorion being just Flicker Wisp number 5 as well. The lists these days are playing 4. Some are, obviously this list has 4 Ajani and a bit more of an aggressive curve to it, but I personally favour the paper lists with the plan of going into 4 copies of pre-war formal wear, a Fallout 40k card that's 2 and a white for an artifact equipment that says when it enters the battlefield, you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield of mana value 3 or less, and then attach it to it, and it gives that creature +2/+2 and vigilance. And it's got equip 3, so you can basically flicker it in and out, reanimate your creatures, but like not like Reanimator's doing, not reanimating an Atraxa, just reanimating all of the value bears that you've created over time. Bringing back your Recruiter of the Guard that you chump blocked with, bringing back your Flicker Wisp, flickering the pre-war formal wear, bringing back your Spirit of the Labyrinth that got lightning bolted on turn 2. It's
getting all the permanents.
Or if you want to take game actions and don't want to play Brainstorm. Here you go. That's basically the Venn diagram.
So you heard it here first, guys. If you want to join a cult with none of the upside and all the downside, this is the place for you.
Yeah, the Kool-Aid has something funny in it, but
Death and Taxes uses time, and it uses it very well. It utilizes time. You give Death and Taxes more time, it will do more things. Unlike the control deck, where they just want to pass go, and answer your stuff. If you allow Death and Taxes, they will take proactive, almost like a proactive strategy, and use that time. So to beat this deck, deny them of time.
It's like an aggressive control deck.
Very much so. Right. Let's get to crop rotation decks. Ooh.
Yes. We've not looked at a lot of green decks. We splattered an Nardu splash, but other than that, and of course the Eldrazi cards are supposed to colorless.
Would you say green's the weakest in Legacy right now?
Absolutely not. Oh no.
Between Beanstalk and this. Oh my goodness. Not at all. I think it's safe to say there's no weak color. Maybe red, right? Like
I'm right here. Red's fine. Red's fine. So, Cloudpost. Okay, now Luis, I need to take you down a slight memory lane. Cloudpost, very, very good. Do you know why it's good? Because it got one thing. And it got Planar Nexus. And it got Soaring Microspore. So now, one thing that Cloudpost used to really struggle with was against combo. If you played any crop rotation strategy, lands, depths, Cloudpost, fast combo used to get eaten alive by it. Because it was just like, they just go land, and then the opponent goes, well, I just kill you. Now they have One Ring, they have Kozilek's Command, they have their own Vexing Bauble. They now have ways of like playing these early things that kind of don't really disrupt them. And they can kind of just, this deck wants to get to the late game. It doesn't. Like, it wants to get to a late game because this late game is better than anything else you're doing. Because Eye of Ugin gets you Emrakul Caracas gets you You have a bunch of utility lands that you can just fetch up with Sowing Microspawn or Crop Rotation and basically do a thing and just make 1,000,000 mana.
Yeah, to be clear, I think you're right, Sahar, but unlike Death and Taxes, which wins through lots of incremental gain over time, like Josh was saying, each turn it's going to be doing something. This is building every turn, right? It's like the Doom riff, right? And it just crescendos
And then you're
into one
dead.
very loud noise rather
Yeah.
than lots and lots of a cacophony of little white creatures.
And to a lot of people that don't know what's going on exactly on the deck list, because some of you may look at this and be like, why is there only
Yes.
Urza's Tower in it? Where's the other Urza's lands? Planar Nexus here. Very interesting card. It makes every land type. So
Yeah, it does.
you have...
His power plant and mine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it fits
explain.
the post as well, so it counts as a post, which is insane.
Yeah,
The locust. Yeah.
And there's quite a lot going on in here that if you like big mana and you like just showing off to your friends, this is the place for you.
Josh is like holding in his desire to tell you how fragile a mana base is. I can see it.
It is fragile, but not that fragile.
I'm just used to seeing like these sort of decks as playing an Infect player and being like, oh look, I buy.
I think it's not necessarily as true as it used to be, but you are right, especially for something like Infect. Basically, the way that this deck beats Wasteland is just by playing more lands, right? Like, it's really difficult to Wasteland this deck if it's got a head on curve and is be able to play Crop Rotation in response to your Wastelands. If it's able to play Sowing Microspawn and get extra lands into play every turn. If it's able to keep its hand fueled with copies of the One Ring, copies of scrying away cards that it doesn't want, drawing cards it does with Kozilek's Command, providing card advantage or card selection. Where otherwise decks like this wouldn't have had that. I think, and then again, we're looking like the Eldrazi lists. Once you're at 4 mana, which is kind of 2 lands a lot of the time in this deck, you're already playing some of your big haymakers, and I think that's why this deck has risen to prevalence, despite the fact that we talked about Wasteland Days, Psychic Frog for a long time at the beginning.
So you're saying keep 7 land hands against Wasteland decks. Got it.
Not about that, but...
So, I think something in the sideboard you'll notice, Luis, there's a basic plains. Because it has 4 copies of Swords to Plowshares, because it also needs an answer to the Reanimator baddie. So this list has opted. It's also a Karn deck. It doesn't have the biggest Karn wish board, but it has, Karn Lattice will win you the game sometimes. This deck also has its I win buttons in Emrakul with Karakas. You have it has crop rotation to get you things like Tabernacle or Talon Gates or Echoing Deeps to like get if you need to phase out attacking a track, so you can do. So it's trying to this is Lucra is trying to crescendo to that point, and I think whilst it's not popular in terms of online presence, it is popular in paper by it's sort of in the same category as I would put like the lands and depths and people like that. You will play against it at least maybe once, maybe twice if you play against some people, but you need to be aware of it because you need to respect the big mana decks.
Yeah, it made top 8 of ELM. It's no slouch.
Yeah.
And it's very, very resilient now with the plan B of Tower plus Planar Nexus, as well as Cloudpost plus Glimmerpost. I think there's a lot to be said for this deck's ability to generate the mana it needs to play a thing that is difficult for you to deal with.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's what it's trying to do.
I love it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
If you like Big Tron, come try this one out, essentially.
Yeah.
If you like Big Tron, come and try this one out.
It's better than Tron, Happy. We get more mana than Tron.
And remember, you only need 2 lands to have Tron.
I love it. And then finally, Luis, we need to talk about what is essentially Jund.
Yeah.
This is essentially Jund. Cradle Control. I want to give a big shout out to Hello Newton, because Hello Newton, you think Death and Taxes is a bit of a I'm not going to say a cult, a following. Cradle Control has a very, very active and very loyal following. So one proponent of it is Andrea Mengucci. But Hello Newton has been a big proponent. He was a big Elves fan, and then has sort of taken Gaia's Cradle in this sort of direction of being the ultimate toolbox deck. This is the ultimate toolbox deck. It has a bunch of ways to like win the game, but it's not winning the game like as like an I win button. It has natural order for Craterhoof and Atraxa. I don't think this version actually has Atraxa, but it can have Atraxa. But it's trying to grind you out. it's trying to use Green Sun as silver bullet answers and a way to effectively Jund them out.
I'm glad you called this, Jund. So, Death and Taxes is playing lots of medium bad cards that collectively build towards this really powerful board state. Eldrazi is playing lots of terrible cards and then one really good card. This deck is kind of playing a lot of medium, right? It's like the mana dorks aren't very good, but they're attacking, they're blocking. It's the the white of the reliquaries, sorry, the endurances and the Springheart and Antukos that are really like making this deck tick along. And we've kind of looked at like a few decks now. They look like janky piles of 60 or 80 nonsense cards. And that is Legacy. So if you're looking at this list thinking, what is it doing? Trust us, right? It's good. Because it doesn't look it, but it is.
What? So sorry, I'm trying to struggle to read this list. So this list is what Andrea Mangucci played, and he played. What's the card that they used to sacrifice a green creature?
Natural order.
Natural order. I played natural order, right? And I must say that card is so fun. Like if I wasn't blue, like on my blue decks, I'd be looking at natural order decks because those cards are so fun. I like to me, like I know we're very proxy friendly this podcast, and ELM's very proxy friendly, but I try not to do proxies. Like if I don't own the deck, which is probably the reason why I've gravitated towards the sort of blue black piles, blue green piles, etc. If I don't own the deck, I probably won't look at it. But if I owned Guy's Cradle, I would 100% be playing a deck similar to Mangucci's because it is so fun.
It is the epitome of it. This deck is a lot of fun. This deck is also the ultimate toolbox. You know, actually, you spoke about Yawgmoth, Ollie, Luis.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Yawgmoth nerds will probably look at this deck and see a lot of like maybe not similarities, but they're like, it's like I see something that is in there, and a lot of Legacy. There's Grist, there's Collective, but no, it has a similar. Unlike Yawgmoth is trying to assemble his pieces. Yawgmoth's plan B of trying to do the kind of grindy, plan B, like here's my creatures, here's a Grist, here's do this stuff, here's a Shelly. That's kind of what Cradle Control does. You're leveraging the power of Gaia's Cradle as a mana-producing land, but also as a way to get ahead on mana. That is what a lot of this deck's power is you're trying to get ahead on mana. So then you can then play these powerful spells ahead of curve. This is also very, very extremely adaptable.
Yeah, and I think that's how you're going to get a lot of your wins. Your opponents, your deck is so... You've got access, despite being a non-blue deck, you've got access to a large percentage of your deck at any moment. You've got two different powerful cards that tutor up lands in Elvish Reclaimer and White of the Reliquary. And then you've got like 4 Zenith, 1 Fiend Artisan, 3 Natural Order to go and find other things. And I just think between these toolboxes, your opponent's going to look at your board state and go, I don't have the mental power to process all the possible things you might have in your deck that I have to play around in this instant. So I'm going to do the thing that I think is best for me. And then they'll get blown out by an Endurance, or they'll get blown out by main deck Collector Roof, or they'll get beaten by Springheart and Antuko just making a few guys over a couple of turns, and they weren't calculating combat damage ahead of time by just White of the Reliquary, sacking one and going getting fetch land and getting 2 more. Things like this. Little tiny tricks make playing this deck super rewarding and make it playing against it really difficult.
This deck is one of those decks that if you play against it, and there is a strong and loyal fan base to play this deck. You might not play this deck. You might not play against this deck in maybe a 6-round tournament. At Eternal Weekend, by God, you're going to play against it once. It top 4'd Eternal Weekend last year. Mangucci's been winning with it. It is getting.
He came top in the Swiss, didn't he? Mangucci was
yes, he did. And he qualified for ELM 2025. But yeah, this deck is something that, as Luke said, it's a absolute pain to play against because you have no idea what they're trying to do.
The innovation of the second Talon Gates of Mathara is pretty funny because everyone you play around that you can once that card got big, got famous. People could play around the first copy, but no one was playing around the second copy until they started putting the second copy in. And now I have to play around the third one, right? Just in case Hella Newton's been tweeting this day and I've not read it yet, and they're on the third copy. And especially because you can like do random crap, like endurance it back in and then play it off a White of the Reliquary during combat. You can do all that during combat, right? Like before blocks, I'll play this endurance, shuffle in my Talon Gates of Mathara, then sacrifice my White of the Reliquary to get back Talon Gates of Mathara, flicker out your Merit Large, block your other thing, right? Like it's just mad. Like
it also has.
I love this.
It also has Bojuka Bog. It's the only deck that gets to play Bojuka Bog.
Eldrazi gets to play it. Both the Eldrazi list
too.
and Post get to play it. But yeah, you're right. There's another powerful land that it has access to at like basically all times. It's got one of those 8 powerful lands.
Very cool. It gives a lot of feelings of like even like Maverick style decks and that style.
This is the Maverick of now for sure.
This is I mean, Maverick players still love Maverick, but this is this is very much what Maverick is in 2024. Even though Dudes on Twitch will tell you that Maverick is still playable in our year and Lord 2024.
And we've got to talk about the honorable mentions. You know, we haven't talked about Doomsday. We haven't talked about Oops All Spells. We haven't talked about a lot of these. Mono Black Necro, Blue Black Necro. We haven't talked about Tez. We haven't talked about Ant variants that are creeping back in. Sahar?
Folks, one thing about Legacy is you can literally play whatever you want. Things like Show and Tell, things such as Beanstalk.
Broad beans, 4-color beans, 5-color Yorion beans.
World Gorger combo.
Red Black Reanimators coming back. I've been trying a list. Beseech, One Ring Tendrils, bought. I'm enjoying bought.
Nadu Elves. There's so many. Look, one thing about Legacy now, and I think it is starting to become a lot more prevalent, and I think some players are happy and a bit annoyed about this, is that there are cards and archetypes that you can gravitate towards, be it Crop Rotation, Urza Saga, Dark Ritual, Ponder, Delver Wasteland Days, Ancient Tomb decks.
Just on that, and it's a subject that I have been. We've been covering throughout our pods, and I'm going to talk about this because it's very relevant, is that Legacy has an identity. And think what Modern lost with MH. It lost its identity, since Opal ban, since Luton ban, it lost its identity. Standard, whatever. Pioneer, what is Pioneer? There's very little formats now with an identity, but Legacy is the one true bastion of a format. And I'd say, I guess Vintage would be the same as well, but I'm not.
Well, they banned Urza Saga, right? They restricted Urza Saga Vintage, so that's even
Nothing
up for grabs now.
Nothing changed. Format stayed the same.
I don't know Vintage. I've never played it in my life. But with Legacy, there's you quite rightly you can gravitate towards Crop Rotation. There's all these key cards: Wasteland, Days, Reanimate, all these cards that identify with Legacy that you can gravitate towards. And I love that when you said that.
Let's finish quickly by going over which deck we take to Eternal Weekend. So, what do you take?
Eldrazi and Ancient Tomb deck, either Eldrazi or Mono Red.
Josh?
I'm torn between Blue Black Reanimator and the Tempo deck version.
How about you, Luke?
We haven't talked about Bug Beans. I think I'd be on Bug Beans. That list looks sweet. I've been enjoying watching Pokimoki, Boshroll play with Aaron with those lists. Luis, just from our overview, have you got any idea what you'd play?
I think I really like the look of the Grixis Tempo style decks. That's my kind of. I love Grixis. Everyone who knows me knows that Grixis is my favorite. I'll find a way to fit a Keikaman in there as well because I love that card.
Nice, sure.
On that note, Luis, if you really want to really feel something, you can play Grixis Control and play Jace the Mind Sculptor,
Baleful Strix,
and Baleful Strix.
Him to Torax.
That card's underrated. But yeah, there's so much choice. I hope that your listeners are really getting an idea for how wide and interesting the format can be. And it's not just Frog. It's not just Frog.
Yeah.
It's not just Frog.
You were saying
you need to be prepared for Frog, though. You need to be prepared.
No. And from everything we're saying, there's a lot going on. We really want people to get a feel for Legacy. Come and join us in this nice side of Magic that a lot of people miss out on because of fear of price, fear of the unknown, all these kind of things. And to those listening that have 4 Gaia's Cradle, I'm pretty sure Josh would love to sell his kidney to you. So if you want to do that, go for it. And to
kidney
the command...
Kidney or kid?
Both at this point, probably. And to those Commander players that are listening, you're, you got a few cards that are now gone and not legal anymore in your format. Maybe you get rid of those cards, try and use some of that money towards Legacy, and then you can use a lot of the other cards you see in Commander in Legacy. You might not be able to use Mana Crypt just yet because that card is very much banned everywhere else, except I think Vintage.
I got one in Vintage.
You will get a lot of that feeling of fast mana, cool interaction, fast stuff going on in Legacy. Give it a go. Maybe you'll like it.
And you can qualify proxy friendly through the ELM structure.
Yeah, you can.
Listen,
Josh. And thanks for having us.
Listen,
Thank
I really
you.
want to thank you for coming. This was a very passionate podcast. I must say, there's a lot of passion because that's what Legacy does to people. It makes me I was playing Legacy today. I was very, very happy. It just makes me happy. Even when I was getting necroed in the face, I was like, this is cool to watch. I don't care if it's happening to me. I just want to watch it. So thank you, Luke and Sahar and Luis. Cheers for everybody. This was a really interesting conversation. Everybody, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us some of your best Legacy moments. Tell us some of the, if you were to play an Eternal Weekend tomorrow, what deck would you play? Let us know in the comments, and we'll engage with you.
Yeah.
But, yep.
And which card? And should Josh sell his kidney or his kid for the Gaia's Cradles? Let us know. Give us a vote.
Yeah, you decide.
You decide.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.